this morning. My name is Stuart Ellis. I'm the CEO of Charter School Capital, and we're here this morning for growth strategies for charter schools. We're going to discuss the various stages of growth today. As we go through things today, it's an important reminder, and I'll mention it a couple of times today, that following the webinar this morning, or I guess afternoon for some of you, morning for others, a copy of the presentation is available for download, and in fact, a recording of the presentation is available to the extent you want to link into it and share the printed materials or the content of the PowerPoint presentation or the audio for the webinar today. Those are both available for you to share with others or join and listen to at a later date. I am very excited to have with me today Kendell Walton, who has provided an incredible amount of expertise and support to charter schools of all stages across the country, and particularly in Michigan. But Kendell's expertise is renowned amongst his clients and those across the charter school industry. Kendell, welcome today. Can you give everybody a little bit of background on you and the clients you've served and the roles you've played for charter schools?
Yes, thank you for having me, Stuart, and the team. So we began assisting charter schools in 2010 with a couple of startups in the Metro Detroit area, of which after starting those, we continued our participation or involvement in that one particular school through at least, if I recall correctly, year 2 or year 3. At that point in time, we transitioned to assist a couple other startups, as well as providing support for academies, a couple of academies that had been in existence beyond that year 3, year 4 mark. So great success track record in the state of Michigan in particular, and it's definitely been the experience of which we'll touch base on throughout this presentation.
Well, I appreciate your expertise and really am excited to have you join us today as we walk through your thoughts and some of the support materials. I think it'll be exciting to hear the examples of some of the different strategies applied, mistakes and successes of organizations that everybody can learn from. As we go through things today, a couple of things for people to note. If I can just get the slides to change. The things we're going to cover today, we're going to go through charter school growth stages and the way we think about things at an industry level, challenges that school operators face during the startup phase, during stages or periods of high growth, and then in the later periods that we at Charter School Capital refer to as the sustainable maturity period that people kind of aspire to. Though I think most people, to the extent you think that's a period of coasting and retirement, I think one of the things is that every one of these stages, there are different best practices and takeaways and insights from the experiences we've had across the country and that charter school leaders have had, and that Kendell will be talking about. As background, as many of you know, but for those of you who don't, Charter School Capital is primarily a finance organization, but a support organization for charter schools. We have funded over 500 charter schools in the country, supporting well over 550,000 students in our history. We formed the company actually 10 years ago, September 2006, began funding schools at the end of 2007, and today, to date, have invested well over $1.2 billion in charter schools during our history. but as a result of supporting all of those organizations, we've gleaned quite a bit of insight into some of the most effective practices across the industry that could really be applied in any environment. And I think a lot of Kendell and my conversation today will be bringing out some of those lessons learned. Again, as I mentioned, the presentation is available for download today. You can get it at slideshare.net/charterschoolcapital. You can see that on the screen here. And registrants, you will get a link to all this, so you don't have to take screenshots of each thing or memorize any of the things. You'll have access to it afterwards, and again, as we mentioned, you can share it with others. That said, just a high-level overview of the stages of growth, or these at least theoretical points where practices change, just to frame things. For purposes of discussion today, we're thinking about things in really three different phases in terms of the development timing of charter schools. This startup phase, with typically years 0 to 2 or 3, where the organization will typically have up to about a quarter of the students it will have at maturity. For some schools, boom, you break right out of the box with everything, but most schools it's not that way. And so this early period where the primary focus of the organization is simply to get up and running and simply survive. We'll talk about why that's so critical in a moment. A second stage of high growth where you're more like, as an organization, your institution and your school is more like almost like a teenager, if you think about an adolescence, where at the beginning of the period, you're one way, you fit in one set of clothes, but literally over the next 2 years, you will change so drastically that nobody would even recognize you, similar to the way somebody goes from maybe age 12 or 13 to what they look like at age and feel like at age 16, 17. Charter schools go through the same thing, very high growth, and there the focus is really about flexibility and stability, stabilizing your organization, finding partners or resources that you can utilize that can grow with you very rapidly. And there you will typically grow from that startup phase to almost full capacity in terms of students. And then finally, sustainable maturity, a period where you get to your target population and things are much more about efficiency, reducing costs, so that you can plow that back into your organization, your academic programs, et cetera. We're going to talk about those different strategies. Sustainable maturity doesn't mean that you're done. It may mean that you then operate a single entity, single school, or that having been successful, you decide that your organization wants to replicate your programs and expand in other ways. Whatever you decide to do strategically, these are the three phases we're talking about today and the way we think about it. And the most significant thing to note is 87% of all charter schools that close during their first 3 years of operation. So that point about startup is about survival is very important. Back at the end of 2011, and I know that's now 5 years ago, there was an analysis and survey done, but this still holds true today from focus groups and analysis across the country. Just hasn't been done on a national basis again. The reasons for charter school closures were identified by the Center for Education Reform, and over 40% of schools closed because of, hey, we just can't make it financially. Our programs cost more than the revenue we have coming in, or mismanagement, another quarter of the schools. So 2/3 of all schools closed based on financial issues or mismanagement. I view personally those two things as the same, and it's similar to kind of the way my dad always jokes about his hip surgery. My dad's in his 80s. He always jokes that the hip surgery was success, but the patient died. And you can have a great academic program, but frankly, if you run out of money, it doesn't really matter. In the end, every school, in some ways, kind of, if you stop functioning, running out of money is a primary reason, whatever the things that contributed to it were. The other elements, which we hear much more about publicly, things like academic failure, only 1 in 5 schools close because of academic failure, challenges with facilities, which have, I think, been well documented across the country. Really, 1 in 20 schools actually closure results from that. And so you get an idea of what's going on here. Most of it is around the running of the business of managing a charter school as opposed to the educational component of managing a charter school. Before we move on, any brief thoughts there, Kendell, before we talk about the different elements to consider rolling across the stages of growth?
No, not at this time.
All right. Okay. So from a framework standpoint, we're going to talk about elements across each of these stages, but just things to think about as a charter school leader, as someone thinking through these things and running schools today. In each of these 3 phases, startup, growth, or sustainability periods, there are a lot of different elements to consider. We've tried to summarize those or just think about them from a framework standpoint in 5 basic elements. One is the financing and how your objectives change and approaches change across the 3 stages. A second being the facilities, same thing, how approach changes. Community involvement, academic accountability, and operational support. And as we roll through these, what you'll see here is at the startup phase, financing, which everybody thinks, or a lot of people think of as, oh, it's all about, I got to get the least expensive money. At some stages, that's relevant, but at startup, really, it's just any money you can get is good. It almost, and I do mean almost, obviously cost matters at some level for everything, but getting capital during the startup period that can sustain your organization just to get beyond year 3 and then be able to modify and morph things is critical. And so anybody who will give you money, whether it's a donation or a loan or other form of financing, or that will just fund things that your school otherwise can't afford, is useful. And getting some version of, we'll gladly pay you Tuesday or Tuesday 3 years from now for a hamburger today is important. Similarly, on facilities, you'd like to have this wonderful, amazing place, but during startup phase, it's most important just to get it in the place you want to operate long term. Community involvement isn't about long-term fabric of the community necessarily at this stage. It's just about, hey, let everybody know we exist. On academic accountability, you haven't been tested yet. You just have to get the program going. And for operational support, you can't afford full-time in-house people with the expertise you need, so you have to lean on outside experts. As you transition to, we've kind of, got our, our wits about us as a school and an organization, into the high growth phase, things start to change. So as opposed to any liquidity for financing, you're now looking for a partner who can scale with you. Maybe you only need $500,000 in year 3, but by the time you get to year 5 with 3 or 4 times the population of students, maybe you need $2 or $3 million. Having one organization or one finance organization that can grow with you, so you don't have to be changing, so management time doesn't have to be spent every 6 months on finding a new finance partner, is important during this period. Similarly, expansion on facilities could be modular to grow with you. And community involvement, people know you exist. Now you have to start, start looking to see if you can fulfill the promise that you made when you started the school in the first place. Academically, your program's being measured. You got to deliver against that. And finally, on operational support, you have some elements and opportunity to begin to have some resources you can support in-house, and others you still have to rely on outside experts. Once you get to a period where you're almost full from a capacity standpoint, you have the target population, whatever you want to serve, whether that's 150 kids or 500 kids or 1,500 kids. Financing becomes, you'll have a lot of options. You're more mature. You have 5 years maybe of operating history. You've had your charter renewed once. Financing becomes about cost. You have a lot more options, and getting the best deal you can is possible and worthwhile. On facilities, you can begin tweaking your facilities to really focus on other things like curve appeal or doing things to further support the academic program. Community involvement, you've fulfilled the promise. Now it's about becoming part of the fabric of the community. Academic accountability is continuous improvement, and now you can probably afford to have most of your team in-house, but that's still a choice you can make. Overall, you can see as we walk through this how things really drastically change in terms of strategies. I'm going to skip this element of finance considerations and just note that there are a lot of options for funding working capital, different structures. In the end, it's depending on the stage, any of these tools are available. Receivable sales is now very common across charter schools, given the tool that Charter School Capital pioneered. Term loans, lines of credit, there are other forms of financing. On the facilities front, leases, which people think somehow are often not, hey, I don't own it, it's a lease, is really a form of financing too. It's really a form of 100% financing. Bonds, traditional bank loans, there looking at all the rules makes sense. And in the end, cost is much more than the percentage rate you pay, or is much more than a dollar. It's also about management time and the things you have to invest, you know, your overall cost. But fundamentally, finance considerations are relevant at every stage. But I don't want to spend a lot of time on this concept. It'll be addressed throughout the material. But just know, I know a lot of you think about where does money come from or what am I going to do at each of these stages. There are a lot of options for charter schools today that didn't exist a decade ago. With that, Kendell, I'd like to turn it over to you to talk about the startup phase and some of the considerations, challenges, and practices that you've seen out there.
Sure. So starting with some of the misconceptions, and I'm piggybacking off of or referencing off of all of my experiences in the three categories that we'll be discussing today. But with respect to the misconception of the founding team to create best practices, I've been a part of a couple of founding teams, and what I've learned is that the founding team is a great catalyst in terms of starting a school, getting the momentum started, and bringing it forward. I've also seen that those founding teams aren't necessarily the best in creating best practices, because in most cases it's an individual person or a group of people who have the best interest of starting the school, but they're not necessarily technical experts in maybe the world of education or academic policy and things of that nature. Another misconception is referencing if you build it, they will come. I've been a part of a startup effort where first day of school, we hit the targets of enrollment and we had a waiting list. I've also been a part of a group where the goal of day one enrollment was 175 students, 150 students, and we only started the first year of school with 32 students enrolled in that school. And so I can't say that the mentality of if you build it, they will come represents every community across the country, but definitely in the Metro Detroit area, and I will probably say in more of the mature areas of the country where charters have been in existence for more than 10 years.
Certainly in our experience too, whatever the dream is, sometimes you open your doors on day one and just not enough people know about you, they didn't show up. It doesn't mean it's over or you're dead. It just is, it's going to be harder to get rolling.
Exactly.
And in mature environments, as you mentioned, Kendell, there are a lot of options. People don't just show up because you put a school on the corner near their home. Sometimes they'll wait to see if you get established and are successful before they come and join.
100%. With respect to some of the challenges, one of the biggest ones is definitely finding good leadership in teachers. You could have, fast forward in 5 years later from the start of a school opening, you could have one of the largest fund balances. But if that fund balance isn't being created where it's bringing in or supporting or financially backing great leadership and great teachers, that school could end up on the closure list without a charter renewal. So as equally as important as making sure there's resources available, as Stuart mentioned, at the startup phase of the academy, finding great teachers and great leaders are paramount to the future success of the academy. With respect to securing resources, as Stuart said, that's one of the most important aspects of startup schools. They're far few in between, but luckily there are partners in the country or across the country that's similar to charter school capital that you could find ways through building a relationship with them how to get the capital that you may need to start that school or to continue operations of that school day one. Finding suitable facilities, I know that's also hard to kind of accomplish. In the Metro Detroit area here, we have ample facility. The Detroit Public School System have unoccupied space, 300,000, 200,000, 50,000 square foot facilities. So there's a plethora of those out there. The issue is that you find is, as a startup, how much money do we have to put into this academy, into this facility to bring it on board? That's one question. And the next question is, you also have to have the long-term thinking as to what facility will be adequate for us, possibly year 3, year 5, and beyond. You also have to just make sure you keep that in mind and evaluate the facilities, because you could be in a situation where you don't have the surrounding acres you need to build on. So depending on what the scenario is, you could be stuck in a situation where you're looking for a brand new facility a couple years later. Healthy enrollment is the lifeblood of any academy. If enrollment is key, that's what's going to either make or break or make your first year or your startup phase a little bit more easier. For example, the scenario that I shared with you all earlier, where we started a school that only had 35 students, that was probably the most complicated school opening that I've ever experienced, just because the resources were so strained in year one. Although we got through it, it was a complicated year. Year 2 was a whole lot better. Enrollment grew from roughly 35 students or so to 350 students. The academy built a track record, relatively speaking. Within the year 1, there was a lot of marketing dollars put behind those efforts as well, the enrollment efforts as well. So we were able to kind of make operational moves, marketing moves to build upon that year 1 35 student enrollment to a much healthier enrollment, which ended up being around 325 students in the second year of operations. And then the sustaining high performance as your networks expands, that is definitely key, and that is a byproduct of just making sure the academy has as many resources, as much as resources as possible in terms of funding, philanthropy possibly, in conjunction with having good leadership and good teachers.
As as we think about these different things and some of the best practices on the page that's popping up now, you've touched on as you go. I think one of the biggest issues around facilities and the really the success you were just describing with the one school is at least there are charter schools that start out commonly in the basements of churches or with mothballed schools, you know, from school districts that those schools are really very old. To the extent those can be in the locale that you plan and community you plan on serving long term, that ends up being important to the extent you end up having to move. You know, it's rare that a school could go from 35 kids to 300 plus kids in the same facility. And so, although it sounds like that happened in the instance you described, but being able to do that in, you know, within a mile or within a few blocks or something close by allows you to transition without losing a bunch of the families you spent so much energy and students you spent so much energy generating, you know, without having to transition. So that's an important consideration to keep in mind as you go forward. Any other best practices thinking about the startup, Kendell? And I hadn't heard, by the way, about that experience. 35 to 300 plus in 1 year is amazing. That school must have had a significant amount of contributed resources or available expand tenfold, you know, that quickly.
Yes, and that was definitely the case. There was a lot of philanthropy assistance during that year, and then thereafter, we've happily and graciously relied on you all for the support since then. So it was definitely a great experience.
I didn't even know that. That's great. Happy to have been a part of that. All right. Thoughts on the best practices for the startup phase?
Just pretty much the bullets kind of highlight the best practices. One of the things I would like to just add, just in conjunction to these items, is just continue to reevaluate the group's performance, whether it's academically, financially, that year, and this goes beyond the startup phase. Just constantly just reevaluating where you are at any point in time compared to where you desire your organization to be from a best practice perspective.
And I'd say one of the other things that's noted here at the bottom of the list, do not waver in your belief or mission, is an important element that I've learned in startups that I've been associated with, including Charter School Capital, but also with all the schools I've seen across the country. The early stage is really hard. The thing you mentioned about, you know, 35 kids going to 300 plus in a year, that the year before opening and then that first year when you open the doors and, you know, kind of nobody's there, those periods can be really difficult. And what I've noticed, a common theme across those schools that just make it through, is they have a leadership team or an individual leader or board members or whoever who are just absolutely unwavering in their commitment to making it work, to the mission of serving the kids that they want to serve, and to their belief in things. And that can be really contagious, that if you are simply unwilling, you know, to let it die when all is dark and it appears all is lost, others will hang in there and get through that storm and get to the, you know, the eventual promised land. But somebody has to be all in and totally committed. that's true at almost any stage, but particularly important during the startup phase, because really so many things don't go as planned early, and I think that commitment is really critical. Anything else here, Kendell? Or go ahead.
You hit it dead on.
All right, should we move into that high growth phase, which for the school you just mentioned was year 2, but jump into that?
Yeah, sure.
All right.
So we'll start with after year 3. After year 3.
Smooth sailing.
It's never smooth sailing because, generally speaking, around that time, you really began to be evaluated by your authorizer, by the state, at least in the state of Michigan. That's that year where you begin the process of preparing for renewal, contract renewal with your authorizer. So academic growth is scrutinized. Your fund balance growth, or just the financial picture of the academy, is scrutinized. And even your facilities are scrutinized with respect to, can that facility provide you with the capacity of a full-blown, mature academy. Performance and accountability requirements will be stagnant. I kind of touched on that with respect to year 3 and beyond being smooth sailing. I've never was a learner of just academic achievement data until I became involved with the endeavor of charter schools. And that is one of the first things I've learned, is that performance measurables are never stagnant. Stagnant. So that's something that you just want to just make sure that, just like anything else, everything is always evolving and always changing. So that's one of the biggest misperceptions that an organization can have, is that if performance and accountability requirements in year 1 will not be the same in year 3, year 4, year 5, and thereafter.
People just keep moving the goalposts. Exactly.
Professional development is important. It's important. Just like any corporation, you want to put investment into your frontline team. That frontline team is your teachers, your administrators. So you definitely want to continue to pump those professional development dollars. And just because you may hit year 3, year 4, year 5, and the first round of academic evaluated data and your financial data looks strong, that is definitely one of the areas that you want to continue to invest in, is that professional development, just to keep that momentum that you've built going forward. No need to change routines or systems. I pretty much piggybacked off of those first 3 bullets with respect to that. We'll have sufficient funds for operating revenue to support expansion.
Right.
How can I put this one? It's the old saying of, it's easier said than done. I would simplify it that way. It's always easier said than done. Projecting that there will be sufficient funds for operating revenue and supporting of any expansion. Yeah, I'll just leave it as the facility upgrades will be minimal, if at all, and if there's a facility involved and you have teaching and learning going on, there's always a possible evolution, possible upgrade, and then if you're provided with the opportunity to have enrollment growth beyond your means or expectations, facility upgrades and expansion is definitely going to be needed. So that one cannot, you always have to keep that in mind as you prepare for every fiscal year that the academy exists.
Kendell, as we're going through, I know you're going to touch on some combination of challenges and best practices, and you tell me which of these you want to look at.
Okay.
We had a question that I think you're going to get into, but maybe one way to go at it is one of the listeners today asked, actually there are a number of questions related to this. What strategies did you employ or the school and the leadership team employ in going from the 35 kids to 350 kids at the startup and high growth example that you mentioned previously? People are interested in some a little more of the details around that success story.
Okay. So the strategies that we implemented to get us through year one, I guess we were fortunate to have a building that was the capacity of the building was way beyond the needs of 35 students. The building had the capacity of about 500 to 600 students. So we were fortunate to, similar to what you mentioned, we had a team that started that school. They were working with that school and trying to get it open for, if I recall correctly, about 3 years. So the school was definitely going to open. So when we started to have concerns about the enrollment, it was a group of us at a table whether or not to open or to close the school. We decided to open it, but we decided to open it with the expectation of having 2 different schools housed within that one building. So from that standpoint, that decision or that strategy assisted us in being able to support the academy from a rent perspective and even from a facility utility perspective. The other strategies that we evaluated and we implemented on was the staffing, of course. We made some consolidations in staff because although we planned for year one to come in lower than what we budgeted initially of 150, 175, it came in drastically lower. In most cases in the Metro Detroit area, if you open up a school, you're looking at, I will probably say about 80 to 100 students. So we at one point was staffed to about 60 to 80 students, of which we did have to consolidate our staff. In conjunction with consolidating the staff at the school, we were fortunate enough to partner up with the other school housed in the building to utilize some shared staff strategy with respect to like the social workers, psychologists, and special education and things of that nature. So that is how we operationally structured our survival, and then financially we structured our survival through philanthropy, and we were given an opportunity to do some additional lending through a local nonprofit that allowed us to borrow some funds at a charitable interest rate, I should say, to get us through. So those are some of the high-level strategies that we used to get us through that first year. And we also did full-year efforts in marketing and recruitment for that year. So we technically had one full year to enroll well, not enroll, but to recruit. And so just about every single week, we had a team of people in local middle schools, as well as churches and other nonprofit community-based entities around Metro Detroit to kind of bring notoriety to the academy, and give them the opportunity to know what staff and what teachers are there. And those were the things that we did to bolster enrollment to the degree that we did.
So just from a time standpoint, as we're walking through this, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the math around growth and benefits. And while we do that, Kendell, I think that your experience with that school is very helpful. We have about 20 minutes left, and we are many of the questions that are coming through today you've been addressing as we go. But let's think about things we're going to do in the latter stage of transitioning from growth to maturity. And while you think about that, I'm going to touch on something that we've developed over time that I think people may be interested in financially. So if everybody will bear with me, I'm going to bring up this tool that, let me see if I can get it so you guys can see it fully. Can everybody see that? All right. They said as though they would talk back to Stuart. All right, here we go. Is that bigger? All right. So I can keep saying that, but I can't do that. I can't. Okay. All right. You guys, there are 4 panels here that everybody hopefully can see. This is a financial analysis that shows the value of the benefits of growth. Well, really from a math standpoint about what kind of resources are created. A lot of times schools or organizations will come in and say, hey, it's expensive to expand and grow, and so why should I do that? And across the 500 plus schools that we've served, who stretch across different regions, different structures, from site-based to online schools to blended learning models. We have a very clear picture of kind of the average cost structure, target costs, et cetera, investments required to expand. And we built that into a tool which people in our organization have used to help other organizations think about growth and what's required. And this example that we're looking at is for an organization that I'm sure is very famous across the country, Very Cool Charter School, which I think actually everybody is Very Cool Charter School. But that said, we've created an example here, our hypothetical Very Cool Charter School. And for this example, current enrollment 500, average attendance 475. You can see in this upper left quadrant that some of the elements of what this school looks like, and it has a target student-teacher ratio or current of 20 students per teacher. We've taken as an average across the country an estimate that to recruit a student costs $700 per student. Now, the reason for that, of course, is that your marketing and expenditures of time, energy, or the community process that Kendell described, it actually takes either management time or money or marketing dollars, and you don't get every student. So on average, we found organizations take about $700 per student to recruit one. We've evaluated in the lower left quadrant an example income statement or P&L for the financials for this organization. What it looks like in the column on the left if there was 0% growth. In other words, what it looked like today when the board and the management team are trying to decide, should we grow? And then we rolled out 3 different scenarios: an expansion of 10% or about 47, 48 kids, an expansion of 25%, so an addition of about 120 kids, or an expansion of 50%, growing to over 700 kids from 475. And we built in what are the investments required and incremental costs required to get there, and then what are the scale benefits that are achieved. And so you can see here some of the breakdown of expenditures: certificated teachers, classified staff or administration, the rent or lease payments, other capital expenditures, and other costs built in that are mostly investments. And you can see incremental costs of adding or recruiting, and then of the facilities investment required. Now, given that this school has room for a little less than 600 kids already, there are no facilities investments required until you go to the 50% growth metric. Down below, you can see the total of all the expenditures that are needed, and where we built in, those are incremental costs ongoing, but down below you can see the growth capital required: $300,000 for 10% growth, $800,000 for 25% growth, and 50% growth is $1.6 million, and that includes facilities investments and the marketing investments to recruit students, et cetera, that are not seen in the financials above. However, even after paying for financing costs and all the other investments and everything like that, what happens at these levels is you then get, out at the 50% example, $700,000 a year of discretionary surplus or effective profits, more capital available, more returns and excess money available at the end of this than you had when you started. Only that's annual. So that can be invested right back into the academic program or other enhancements to your program and support. And you can see in the chart on the lower right the financial impact over 5 or 10 years. So even though maybe it only generates $150,000 a year in year one, over a 10-year period, that's almost $2 million benefit to the organization. At 50% growth, you have almost $9 million of incremental resources available over a 10-year period that the organization can utilize however it wants. And this is all after paying estimated finance expenditures, et cetera. And up above in the graphic, you can see this gold line being the revenues and how they change as you expand, and this blue line being what happens to the expenses or costs. And you can see that as you go out, if things were operating, the break-even analysis is, hey, at 475, that's where we were. What happens over time? And the higher the growth is, the more this spread is between those two, revenues and expense, the more surplus generated that can be utilized to enhance the program. So we just wanted to take a little time and show this. This is the math. This tool can be customized for your board or your management team to think about what investments are required and what things to look about, and evaluate some of the value of growing or expanding if that's a consideration. And it gives you an idea of what you need in terms of financing, which is, you know, this number down here, this 1.7 million was needed to get the 50% growth. So I'm going to hop back into the PowerPoint and allow Kendell to follow up on this last piece, the sustainable maturity phase, as we look at the last about 10 minutes we have in the webinar today. Kendell, any other comments you have either on the mathematical analysis of growth or other things to add as we transition to sustainable maturity?
No, other than that, that's a great dashboard.
Thank you. All right. All right, we're getting old. It's all easy. You can check out and retire, right?
Little do we know. So some of the same common misperceptions that existed in startup, well, not necessarily maybe startup phase, but the growth phase is definitely still in existence. So unfortunately, it's not easy as our snowball is now going downhill and it's bigger and greater and more powerful than ever. There's always still work to be done. at this juncture, even during the stage of maturity. I would probably say it's more work because now you have a track record. There's more eyes on you, and if you've accomplished great things leading up to this, greater things are going to be expected of you thereafter. Time to cash in, another misperception. Just like any other business entity, I'm not saying that a charter school is a business entity, there's always the need of reinvesting, re-identifying yourselves, and that takes money, resources, effort, and time. Challenges decrease as you scale, similar to what I just kind of touched on. There's more challenges just because, again, you have a track record. Well, at least we're all hoping that all charter schools have a positive track record. And if you have a positive track record leading into that mature stage, more is expected of you thereafter.
And of course, you have more people, more locations, more families, more students, which create an opportunity for more challenges.
I guess what the surface pie gets greater, right?
That's right. Let's touch on, given all the various challenges, unless there's something you want to talk about specifically there, highlight some of the best practices that you see at this, once you get out to this stage.
So some of the best practices knowing who your student is, knowing who the population is. I know one of the groups that I work with, they have a team, not saying a 20-person team, but they have a team where that's all they do. They do what they can to track the population movement within their footprint. They're constantly setting up meet and greets for all of their schools. So the enrollment piece now for a couple of the teams that I deal with that either continue to grow the enrollment or achieve the enrollment grow year after year, they conduct enrollment activities all year long and not just during the summer months. Develop data-driven culture and retain the passion that got you started. I guess I hear real-time data during the academic achievement presentations at the board meetings and things of that nature. You constantly want to make strides to improve that area, just from the simple fact that it could help guide academies in their investing into particular areas of improvement to achieve student growth targets that they do desire. And the only way you can make sound reinvestments into your organization is if you have some kind of tool that collects the data and distributes the data where everyone has a clear we all have failures, and we always want to learn from them. And always be transparent, truthful, and open-minded amongst you and your team, if you're a management company, and even involve the board with respect to being transparent with respect to the failures that occurred. I mean, there's always failures. There's always areas of improvement. So as long as you and your team and the board is able to acknowledge where those failures are, you will create your opportunity to improve and learn from them. I'd
add one element I wanted to add to that, Kendell, that we often miss, and I think is important to note. the failures and mistakes are things that, as you noted, everybody learns from and can learn from, and being open to that is really important. I think one of the things I've also seen that is important to keep in mind is to celebrate their successes, and which I think people think just happens naturally, but in my own life, people who have been around me and experienced my stories have heard about my childhood, but I'll share with everybody today that when I was in elementary school, my mom was a middle school math teacher, and as a result, I had a huge advantage over everybody else, early on, because I already knew most of the math. But I remember I came home at 8 years old with a 98 on the test, and I was told by my teacher, my third grade teacher informed me that I had the highest score in the class. He was very proud of me and very excited, and I ran home to tell my mom. She said in her traditional New York accent, she looked at me and she said, "Who got the other 2 points? Do it." And I think it's important that there are always 2 points. There's always improvement opportunities, but to the extent you've been around long enough to get to charter renewal and serving a real community, that along the way you got to celebrate the 98. And I think it's easy to get lost as we always gravitate to the failures and mistakes, but celebrating the successes of your teachers and staff and frankly the students and families and their achievements are still significant and something to remember as you go along. I can never forget the other 2 points, but all right. Anything else? Go ahead.
I guess just the other key point is make sure, as an entity, as an academy, you define who you are, what you do great, and continue to improve on that. You can't be all things to everyone, so that's one thing to just keep in mind as the academy looks to get to maturity state and thereafter.
One of the things that has come up during the session, and I hope we've been able to cover, and you've heard Kendell relate a lot of his experiences and specific examples, is questions have come up about how the strategic lens shifts, transitioning of resources or key leaders that were very critical and had the right expertise and experience for the startup or early stages, maybe a lot more passion than institutional management expertise. Those things obviously have to be managed carefully, right, with respect provided to the individuals that have really created the organization, and hopefully find roles they can be successful in over time if they don't have the real experience or expertise to lead, an organization with 1,000 kids while they had the experience to get the charters and get things launched when you had 100 kids. But I think we tried to highlight as we go through here how strategically your focus on different elements can change and how best practices really vary from what things look like at the startup phase through maturity. To the extent there are any follow-up questions on that, one of the things I did want to let everybody know, and this is some of the transition that was in summary, and I know this is high level, but one of the things to let people know is, again, all of this information is available to download. You're going to get a link to that presentation material after the webinar today. But please feel free to reach out to, and Kendell, I don't know if you really want people reaching out to you, but I think contact information is here. to reach out to Kendell, and to the extent you want to get into some of the details, or to me or the team here at Charter School Capital, to the extent you have follow-up questions, or would like to tap into some of the Kendell's expertise, or those experiences and examples of schools across Michigan, or dealt with some of the challenges you may be facing in your organization. And those could be, hey, we have financial questions, or they could be, we need money, but they could really also be on any of these other levers that we've talked about, whether it's the facilities challenges, investments required, the network necessary to have people support you from a marketing standpoint, or just hearing about strategies. And one of the things that you may hear as a theme as we've gone through this today is that there are a lot of people. 7,000 charter schools exist across the country. More have existed and failed, and others, continue to expand. There's still 1 million+ kids on waiting lists across the country. But across the 7,000 schools that exist today and other efforts, there are a lot of organizations like Kendell's organization and ours that have experience and expertise. Please tap into that experience with these advisors and other leaders of other schools. This is not an industry of intense competitors trying to kill off everybody else. This is an industry supporting the education of children and the support of family growth in these communities. There are passionate leaders who are committed to enhancing the education and lives of children. And frankly, you can learn a lot from other leaders, whether it's through us or other community members and other leaders of other charter schools or other educational institutions. Reach out, have people help. We're all willing, and I think you'll find other leaders in the industry are willing to share their experiences and help you overcome some of the challenges you face at any of these stages. Kendell, I wanted to thank you very much for joining me today and sharing your experiences and expertise. It's really insightful. The examples you raised are, frankly, very helpful. I appreciate you joining us today. Is there anything you'd like to add as we close things out today?
I would just like to thank you for the opportunity again
to
share my experiences.
It was really great to have you. Your experiences are very insightful. Again, for everybody, the presentation's available to the extent you want to get into it and share it with others. That's welcome, and feel free to reach out to Kendell or us to the extent you have follow-up questions or anything else. Thank you all for joining us today. It's been a pleasure, and Kendell, it's an honor and a privilege for me to share the stage with you today. Thank you for joining us.
Likewise. Thank you.